So I'm going to be talking about the first 20 years of the Master Gardeners, how they got started and how they developed over that time period. There's a couple of areas I'll go past that to current days, but most of it is focusing on this first 20 years. I wanted to note on this first slide in the lower left corner, the Extension Master Gardener logo. This is the new logo out of the state VCE for Master Gardeners. And they've said that the local organizations are able to pick this logo up and use it by adding their names, or they can continue with their own logos. First of all, this was definitely a team effort. Myself, Gary Streb, and Hope Yelnick. Hope really found some of the material and inventoried the material down at the Toronto VCE office. And that was a big kickoff to locating some of the critical information that we were looking for. Some of that information came from an effort from 2003 to 2005. Janie Fellows was the historian for that time, and Barbara Gustafson, Sally Sissel, and actually also Aileen Bartlett formed a working group to try and go in and research the beginnings of Master Gardeners. They gathered material, they did a lot of notes, they had an outline for 23 chapters. They were really going to do a very exhaustive effort. And they worked on it for about a year and a half. And then, it's very hard to carry on a long-term volunteer effort. It seemed to have just kind of lost steam, really, with everyone's lives interfering in the ability to carry this. I wanted to read a couple of lines from an email, and this is from Barbara Gustafson to Janie Fellows. I hope there's a way to keep this going and not lose all we have done. Right now, with Sally off on one of her trips, my mother-in-law driving me rather crazy, and Art and me getting organized for Master Gardener College and our delayed honeymoon, I think I won't wait on this, and I will wait on this until I return in July. And that was certainly kind of an issue I found in working on this. If you don't have a deadline and it isn't fairly soon, it's very difficult to really make progress on a volunteer project like this. It's interesting that Janie Fellows declined to be historian for an additional year. However, they did leave a wealth of notes, and I was extremely pleased to be able to find them in the plastic bin that Hope had identified down in the Toronto office. This is really phase one of an effort that myself and Gary and Hope are making. The second phase will be a written article in the October newsletter. Gary has taken the write-up that this presentation is based on and sent it out to the emeritus and master gardeners that trained the first 20 years to get their comments. He'll be incorporating their comments into that write-up with Hope's assistance, and then that will form the basis for the October newsletter. In November and December, we'll be doing profiles of pioneers who made us who we are. These are people who were strong leaders during this first 20 years. And hopefully I'll be doing a tree steward history in the later winter newsletter. And this is really enabled by Sue Liddell, who passed me a PowerPoint presentation with a lot of really good photos and a little bit of text that documents the tree stewards up to about 2015. I wanted to remind people of a saying you hear quite a bit, and it actually came from Voltaire: the best is the enemy of the good. So definitely what I've got here today is not the best, but hopefully it is good, or good enough to give you some feel for what the Master Gardeners were like when they started out. This is my disclaimer note. It's not perfect. It doesn't address everything that happened in this time period. The years are based on available documentation, and they probably don't cite events that happened outside of the time frames that I have, or continued outside the time frames that I have. Oops. Okay. Master Gardener beginnings, the first 20 years. The Master Gardener organization itself began in Tacoma, Washington in the early 70s with an extension agent called Dr. David Gibby. He transferred in to the Washington Tacoma office as an urban horticulture agent. And he found that he was just overwhelmed with demand for information. He appeared on local television. He wrote frequently asked questions. He wrote various papers. And it seemed like the more information he put out, all it did was increase the demand for information. So he got together with Bill Scheer, who was a commercial horticulturist in Washington State, and they came up with the idea of a volunteer organization. This concept came from their thought about the Mormons and how they use volunteers in their church. So they decided also that they would use a concept from Germany, where they both had spent some time, where the Germans try and honor people who reach a certain level of proficiency in a subject area. And so in Germany, they use the term Gartenmeisters. And so they translated that to English and came up with the term Master Gardeners. So they set out on a trial to train volunteers to meet the needs of providing information to the people that lived in their areas. Initially, when they advertised for that, 600 people responded to the request, saying they had an interest. They selected 300 for training, and the initial group actually included 200 people. So they trained 1 day a week for 5 weeks to get this initial group of master gardeners. This is a picture of Dr. Gibby in 2017 at the Master Gardener College. We were very excited that he was at the Master Gardener College that year, and that's Marilyn Riddle with Ann Nielsen and myself with Dr. Gibby. Dr. Gibby actually didn't stay with the Washington Cooperative Extension very long. He was there 2 to 3 years, and then he left to go elsewhere. But Sharon Coleman, who had been working with him, really took over this concept of the Master Gardener program and evolved it and promoted it. And today the program has spread across all of the United States, and there are Master Gardeners in Canada and South Korea. Some of the early activities. To begin with, all the activities were directed by the agent. One of the big things they did was to provide what they called outreach to the public. That could be presentations, it could be workshops that were done at various locations, it could be, in essence, help desks, where they might set a help desk up at the library or at a garden center for walk-ups to come in and ask them questions. But they also helped out at the VCE office in doing just those average tasks that have to be done, such as manning the phones or straightening up the filing system or just staffing the office. They did gardening service for their local area here. They landscaped public areas and planted highway medians. One of the rules in the very early days was that projects had to have definite end dates. They couldn't last more than 2 years. So while generally today we have a lot of ongoing projects, in the beginning they all had to have a specific end date. We, of course, are an association here. The fact that we became an association grew out of one of the Master Gardeners, actually 2 of the Master Gardeners, attended a training seminar at Virginia Tech, and it gave them increasing awareness of the Master Gardener practices across the state, and gave them a better idea of the range of projects that other units were working, and the fact that other units were actually tracking their volunteer hours, and also the importance of setting a specific time and place for the meetings, and selecting really high priority projects to work. And I thought this was interesting, probably the need to have elected officers. From the James City County Williamsburg Association of September 1999, there were 28 original members. They included Aileen Bartlett, Jim and Nelda Presley, who have been active in Master Gardeners. I think Jim and Nilda are emeritus, but they're still active in the plant sale and certain activities. And Aileen was attending meetings up until last year, I believe. They decided to have a phone tree as the means of keeping everyone informed. And they would publish a newsletter called Gardener's Gazette, and Aileen was the first editor. And I just realized that I inadvertently skipped one, I believe. Yes, so we'll go back to this because this is important. This first training from 83 to 90, we didn't have training here just for James City County. It was an area training, I guess, similar to the way that we do our tree steward training today. So it was Peninsula Master Gardener training. And Jim Orban, the agent at York, really organized this training, and he did a lot of the actual presentation of information himself. He was a really good agent, very well thought of, and he was a really friend to the Master Gardeners and growing the Master Gardeners in this area. In the first class, there were 4 attendees from James City County, and overall, the trainees ranged from 0 to 12 in terms of the number of people from James City County who attended. And all in all, there were 43 James City County Master Gardeners trained during this time period. And I want to point out that Aileen Bartlett was in the class of 85. Jim Presley was in the class of 87, and Nelda Presley was in 1988 class. Now, Peggy Kraft took her training in 1990, but she's not on this list because she was living in Hampton at that time, and this list was only the James City County people who were being trained. But Peggy moved up here to Williamsburg approximately 1993, and she's been active in our Master Gardener group ever since then. Okay, initial bylaws. So in 91, they wrote their initial bylaws, and this is the purpose. 4 items are included. And the thing that struck me about this initial purpose was the last one, which mentioned social activities and the social aspect of the organization, which I thought was interesting as part of the first definition. The dues to begin with were just $15 a year. And let's remember, those dues of $15 a year stayed in place until approximately 2 or 3 years ago. So that really held. The officers are a bit different than what we have today. They met the first Wednesday of each month, and they met at different places. And the president determined the time and the place where they would meet. There were certain standing committees, and you'll note one of those standing committees is the telephone tree, because we're really talking very early days of email now. Email wasn't something that everybody had at that point in time. There was a song. I found 2 copies of the song. One copy looked like it had been typed up on a computer, but there was a copy that appeared to be a more original copy that was obviously typed with a typewriter. I don't know how much this song was actually sung by the Master Gardeners. You can kind of get images of Master Gardeners around a campfire roasting marshmallows singing this song, but it's sung to the tune of Clementine. And if you'd like to see all verses of the song was published in the September issue of our newsletter. James City County, Williamsburg began their own training in 91. And you can see through these stats that I was able to find in the information, there was significant fluctuations in the size of the class. Sometimes it was pretty large, and sometimes it was kind of modest. In 96, they thought they would try a new approach for teaching and have the people from the previous class essentially teach the new class. There's no record of how this went, but there's also no record that this was continued past 1 year. The training cost at that time was $70. The trainees had to complete 50 hours of volunteer service, which sounds very familiar to what we do today. However, it's interesting to note that at that time, members only had to give 15 hours per year to maintain their membership in Master Gardeners. Certainly, one foundation of our training is the Virginia Gardener Handbook that the Virginia Cooperative Extension publishes. 1990 was the earliest version that I was able to find on the internet. There was an original version printed in January 85, but you can see here it's not revised on a regular basis or a periodically defined basis, but it is revised very regularly. One thing that really caught my eye in looking at the 1990 version is how they reference that they have included segments from Master Gardener handbooks from other states, and also apparently the Northern Virginia Master Gardeners had their own handbook, and they incorporated information from that. They gave a special thanks to the Texas A&M and Texas Agriculture Extension Service for the use of some information from their versions. So it's interesting to see that, by this time in 1990, Master Gardeners across different states were working together. The handbook, of course, has evolved. Across the top, you see different years when new editions were published. It stayed a black and white document until this year, 2023, when a new document is actually just recently being published in hard copy. It's been available for a bit on the internet. You can go to the internet and you can just Google Virginia Cooperative Extension Gardener's Handbook or Virginia Master Gardener Handbook, and you can get to the link where you can download it for free. Or you can actually order it from Amazon. It recently became available on Amazon. It's got almost 600 pages. It only costs $22. It's an extremely good buy. And these are just a couple of pages to give you a bit of a feel for how the inside of the document looks. And I'm sure most of you who are listening to this and who are Master Gardeners very well remember our Master Gardener handbooks that were all black and white. So seeing this information in color really is a treat. The newsletter, of course, has also evolved. As I mentioned before, I think I don't have a copy of the initial Gardener's Gazette. But as they got into the 90s, that evolved and became the newsletter of the James City County Williamsburg Master Gardener Association. And it was printed on green paper, and it was mailed out. I believe it was mailed out the 15th of each month. That evolved fairly quickly into the Colonial Master Gardener, which is the name we continue to use. And they use the silhouette of a colonial gardener as a logo on the newsletter. And then that was replaced by a logo similar to our current one as we got into the early 2000s. And it was 2003 when they decided they didn't have to send it to everyone by news through the mail. They could do distribution by email or paper, and people could choose which they wanted to do. And of course, as you know, currently we primarily distribute by email and by putting it on our website. The newsletter went through various evolutions. None was terribly radical, sort of changed where the logo went or the size of the header or the placement of the header. But recently in 2023, we do have a completely revamped look and feel to the newsletter. And I think it looks rather snazzy. It's very appealing and makes you want to dive in and see what's inside. One of the events that was I think, very formative in evolving the association happened in 96. And in 96, the Virginia state government reduced the budget of the Virginia Cooperative Extension. And in order to accommodate that reduction in budget, the VCE decided they were going to have to in effect, almost sever the connection between the agents and the Master Gardener organizations. Aileen Bartlett was our VMGA representative at that time. She came back from a March meeting and wrote a letter to the association stating that agents who are supported by state tax dollars will not be allowed to conduct Master Gardener training, and that extension agents, when they're asked consumer horticultural questions, that those questions should be referred to the Master Gardeners or tell people to look it up on the internet. Well, this was very alarming, of course, to all the members of the Master Gardeners here. And then in May, they received a letter from Dr. Jones, who at that time was the interim director of VCE. And while much of the letter is devoted to saying how much VCE supports the Master Gardeners and what a good organization it is, but the pithiness of the letter is in the line that says, as you are aware, on July the 1st, VCE can no longer use state funds to support Master Gardener training or management of the program. And when you talk about who can't support Master Gardeners, that also included the faculty at VPI at Virginia State University and the personnel at the research stations. Ed Overton was our local agent, and he too was a very good friend of the Master Gardeners. He was actually 1/3 funded by local funds, and so he was not completely funded by state funds at that time. But what he did, which was really smart and extremely helpful to the Master Gardeners, is he sent them a formal letter in May stating that he recognized the difficulties were difficult and the limitations were going to be difficult for them to accept. And he designated Grace Raymond, who was the Master Gardener VP at that time, as a Master Gardener coordinator for projects. He also said he would designate additional coordinators for various other focus areas in Master Gardeners. And I feel like with this letter, he in effect handed the baton for the running of the Master Gardener Association over to the members of the association himself. But he followed that up later that year with nominating the Master Gardener Association from an Outstanding Service Award from James City County. And they did win that award. And I thought, going back and looking at this, that was over and above a thing for him to do. It was very kind, and it was very much in recognition of the accomplishments of the association. And I don't know for sure that this picture is them receiving that award. It's certainly representational of James City County giving an award to them. In the 90s, one of the big events that the Master Gardener sponsored was the Horticulture Fair. It was similar to our plant sale, but it was broader in terms of content. In addition to selling plants, they had lectures and displays, and they sold birdhouses. The birdhouses were really a significant money-making venue for the Master Gardeners. And that lasted up until about 2015, when it just kind of faded out. To a certain extent, that was because the people who had been doing Master Gardener houses either moved away or died. So I'm not aware that we're really actively doing birdhouses at this point in time. But in the 90s, when they were doing the birdhouses, they actually sold them to the Wildbird store here that sells birdseed, and they would sell it to the store for $11, and then the store would sell it for an additional fund. So that added on as an additional money-making venue for them. There was a Master Gardener cookbook that was apparently available for a couple of years in the middle of the 90s. And they sold baked goods, which I don't think today we would ever consider doing, and t-shirts. The horticultural fair evolved into a spring into gardening in 1996. So they changed the name of that. I wanted to note the net profit that you see down here in the little green box on the lower left. And you can see that what they were netting from these for what we would consider fairly modest sums. Because if you look at what we netted from our last plant sale, it's about I think we netted around $12,000 this year. They did a compost fair on the grounds of Eastern State Hospital for a couple of years. And they also had fall plant sales for several years. And that seems to have been discontinued after 97. In the 90s, they also taught courses at Christopher Wren. You see a picture there of Peggy Croft teaching landscape design. Aileen Bartlett taught annuals, perennials, and flowering shrubs, and Carl Brown taught turf and related issues. They were always present at the county fair, I think probably up until the county fair was discontinued, which was, I think, after 2010, but I'm not quite sure what year. What we call the help desk, they initially called the hotline. It was open Mondays and Wednesdays from 9 to noon. They got an average of a bit less than 400 calls per year. That's just looking at the 3 years between 94 and 97. But it's interesting that their most common topics were animals and insects. As I've worked the help desk this year, certainly like in July, one of our most common topics that we get questions on are tree issues. There was a recommendation to extend the hotline to 4 shifts a day, 4 days a week during the growing season, and then perhaps just once a week after that. And I know our help desk has considered something somewhat similar, but I didn't find information on whether or not they actually did extend the shift to these 4 days a week back then or not. The internet arrived in March of 98. That's when the VCE office got a computer that was for master gardeners to use while they were working help desk. And of course, computers have changed a lot since then. The internet has grown so much because one of the pluses of using this computer at that time was that it would provide access to over 84 garden websites. Now there's almost an infinite number of websites with garden information. They did offer training to help people get on it and use it. And here you see G. Winters in 2002 using the computer there at the help desk. In 2003, we started having a website, and that is largely thanks to Dave Banks, who took his training in 2003. And he's always been a very strong contributor to the association. He's been our webmaster for our website to this day. And he was also president one year, and I don't have that year on the tip of my tongue now, but you see this picture of him in his past president jacket, presented to him in August. And that, of course, is not August of this year. That is August of the year that I got this picture out of one of our older newsletters. They did a lot of service projects for the county. The county actually asked them to develop a xeriscape garden for the James City County Rec Center. And when the Rec Center expanded a few years later, the plants were going to be lost because of the expansion. So the master gardeners went in and rescued the plants and took them to another site. They assisted in developing an arboretum at the James River Elementary School. There was some trouble with vandals when they initially set the trees out, and that was corrected. And after a 2-year period working this, it was turned over to the PTA at the school. One of their interesting projects that they took on, and this was at the request of the county also, is they developed really 2 gardens at the JCC Library in Norge. One was a tree and shrubs and children's literature, and the other was trees useful to colonists. And Peggy Croft did the design for this. The Master Gardener Association received another Outstanding Service Award from James City County in '96 because of this work. The Master Gardeners helped refurbish the landscape at the Blayton Building on Scotland Street, And that, of course, is just across from the library where we have our meetings. And again, Peggy Craft did the design for that. I think for us, it's a bit surprising to see that the Master Gardeners actually provided labor and got out and planted bulbs and pansies for Williamsburg. And this wasn't, I'm pretty sure this wasn't just a one-year thing that they did this. And then they also worked with the students to plant annuals above around the school signs in the 3 schools that you see here. And we did have pictures of that was fun to go back and see. We also did service projects for Colonial Williamsburg. And apparently when this first started, there was a difference made or a distinction made between hours working for Colonial Williamsburg and hours working for the Master Gardeners. They really were counted and put in separate categories, but we worked in the greenhouse, and this is a picture of Aileen Bartlett. And then on the right is a picture of a group of Master Gardeners planting bulbs for Colonial Williamsburg in '95. One of the really interesting service projects, particularly looking backward now, is in the fall, Master Gardeners would go out and plant chrysanthemums at the Rockefeller House. And this continued, as you can see, for several years. So not only did they go out and plant this huge mass of chrysanthemums, they waited a few weeks and then they had to go back and take them all up again. But when they took them up, they were welcome to keep the plants if they so desired. And Sue Liddell remembers that one year she ended up with many, many plants of actually flowering chrysanthemums in her front yard. Some of their other projects, they started a speakers bureau approximately in the mid-90s. There was some concern initially about whether or not they were they knew enough. Their scope of learning was enough that they were able to do this, but they did start it, and of course that's continued to this day. They were doing pruning clinics, which of course continues. They had 2 different programs for working in elementary schools. One was Ready, Set, Grow. The other was Roots and Shoots. It's a little difficult for me to understand exactly how those differ. The best that I can differentiate them is that the Ready, Set, Grow seem to be horticulture instruction in the classrooms, while the Roots and Shoots, where the kids were working outside with actually planting things outside in these, maintaining them in these raised beds. Oh, I have to go back one. Okay. Maddie's Garden, which I think is one of the loveliest projects we've ever had, really, was an offshoot of the Ready, Set, Grow program, the Matthew Whaley School. And it started in 1999. Of course, Jen Rose Lassinger was so very involved with that for such a very, very long time. Every time I hear the term Maddie's Garden, it makes me think of Jen Rose. And one reason she became so involved with it is she was actually a music teacher at that school, which I didn't really know until recently. I mean, I knew she was a teacher, but I didn't realize she taught music. Therapeutic Garden again started in the early 2000s, and I didn't have a specific date for water-wise, but it was somewhere in that time frame. So you see that by the end of the 1990s, we're starting to go into projects that really we still have to this day. I just wanted to mention some of the pictures here, starting at the upper right. The 3 people to the right is Linda Lucas and Barbara Gustafson and Jen Rose that we were just talking about. Below that are a group of people doing therapeutic gardening, and Angela Singale and Barbara Gustafson are part of those people. And then the picture in the middle, which I want to say that this was taken at Master Gardener College, but I don't know for sure that's true. but you see Angela Singel in the middle front on the left, and then Sally Sissel beside her, and then Barbara Gustafson slightly behind Sally. One of the projects that Master Gardeners did that we're no longer doing today, but it was in place for a long time, is Melissa's Garden. Melissa's Garden was supposed to be a wildflower meadow garden. It's close to the William and Mary Law School. But it was actually started by the John Clayton chapter of the Virginia Native Plant Society. And the garden was named for Melissa Ann Long Eckenberg, an 84 graduate of William and Mary, and she was very instrumental in the early planning and development of this garden, but she died in 1996, just really as the garden was getting started. So to honor her, they called this Melissa's Meadow. And you see the stone that it contains the title Melissa's Meadow and how attractive that is in the upper right photo. So the Master Gardeners became interested in the project, and it became an approved Master Gardener project in '98. One of the things they did as an offshoot of this, they would collect the seeds from the wildflowers and then sell them at the Master Gardener plant sales. And in the lower right, you can see this sign that's been put up, and that's for spring. There's a sign for every season that shows the plants that they have in the garden that are blooming at that time. So it was a lovely project. The meadow is not very big. It was maybe kind of the size of most people's living room and dining room combined. It had paths, so you could walk in it. And I remember going out maybe around 2012 to walk my dog in that area. And the project had been closed down. The project closed down after 2010. I don't know a reason why, but so when I saw it, it'd probably been closed for a couple of years. You could still tell where the walking paths were. But I went out a couple of months ago just to take a look to see if there was still anything there. And there are some remnants still. The grounds maintenance people were mowing the grass, and you can see how they've mowed the grass up to the edge of this. And this is the remnants today of Melissa's Garden. You can see the signs are still there. And I expect originally that the garden extended past all of these signs, and I expect it's getting smaller every year, that as the mowers are mowing a little bit closer and closer, and it gets smaller and smaller. There's a lot of weeds in with the wildflowers now, and it's really kind of sad to see it just sort of hanging around, but certainly in tremendous decline. And the signs are still there, all four of the signs. I did not see the stone that said Melissa's Garden. I don't know if it's covered up by the growth or if something happened to it. The signs have very much deteriorated, but you can still make them out. One of the last things I want to mention is just kind of a fun thing, is somebody had given me back in 2020 when I was president, had given me a shoebox size box with photos from the late 90s, early 2000s. And several of those photos had people wearing this t-shirt with Virginia Master Gardeners Cherish Their Roots. And I just was very taken with it and thought it was a really appropriate t-shirt for Master Gardeners. And apparently it was very popular at that time because of the number of photos with people wearing the t-shirt. Okay, that's it for the material. I just wanted to remind you, coming attractions, there will be a printed article in the October newsletter that will be complete, although I'm sure still not exhaustive. And that will be incorporating comments that we received from emeritus and then master gardeners who trained before 2003. And the following 2 months in the newsletter, we'll be having profiles, and we've used the term pioneers who made us who we are. So that will be people like Aileen Bartlett and Sally Sissel and Barbara Gustafson and Sue Liddell and Angela Singel, and people who have just been around for many, many years and who contributed so much to this organization. The goal is to develop a written history for the tree stewards and have that in a late winter newsletter. And this really is thanks to Sue Liddell, who provided information that will support the bulk of that. Oops. All right. I'm ending with a quote from Hamilton: "Who lives, who dies, who tells the story?" There is no story unless somebody tells the story and the story gets preserved. And the best way to preserve our story is to put it in the newsletter. And that's for two reasons. The newsletter goes on the website and it stays there. But it also is given to the swim library and goes into an historical archive there so that it would be available to future generations if anyone should be interested in what was going on in Jamestown or in James City County during this time, or what was going on with Master Gardeners during this time. So I encourage all of you working projects to write articles for the newsletter about your project, and that's the way to preserve information about it. And find some good pictures, take some good pictures. Everybody loves to see the pictures in the newsletter. And that's really the way to preserve what you're doing and the contribution that you're making to the county. And that's all I have for today. Thank you for watching this. I hope you found this interesting, and I hope you will catch the written material in the newsletter in the October, November, and December issues.